Oh dear, you forgot to shave me again this morning. 2, 3, 4. Boo doo 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 doo. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. It's Wednesday. Picks out of the way. Ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. Hi, how are you? This is me and my hair. Ugh, so much of it. I know it's really thoughtless of me to complain about the abundance of hair I have when so many men are without, but that's the sort of man that I am. I'm still able to complain about things. Yeah. All right, so today I went to the funny book store and I bought, for instance, Two Moons #1. This is from the Image Comics group, and I don't know much about it except that it is written by John Arcudi, who is a co-creator of The Mask and Rumble and many other. The Mask is probably his most well-known thing since that became a James Carrey film. But he also writes Rumble, which I think is still going. It's probably on a hiatus of some kind. And it is a Civil War story about a Native American soldier. I think there are some, I don't know, but I think there are some like science-y, fiction-y elements to it, like a horror, whatever, weird war type thing. So yeah, I'm stoked. I like any kind of war book, especially if it's going to be, for one thing, if it's not World War II, because I am OD'd on that. But if there's an element of the supernatural in it, that's always a plus. And also if it's especially for a story like the Civil War, to have a Native American character, that's, obviously we have the white perspective on that going back a way. So it's fun to get other perspectives on that sort of thing. Speaking of which, I also Marvel Voices Legacy #1. This is in the same series as the what was it? Indigenous Voices, the one shot. This is the African American one though, because it is Black History Month. 4 weeks only. That's all you get. And I'm expecting this to be as fun as the Indigenous Voices one was. You got your nice Campbell cover here, right? I think it's John Campbell. I gotta look it up. And on a personal note, I always, especially as a kid, when I started collecting Marvel comics, I was about 11, and then when I was about 13, I decided I was going to be black, and that didn't work out as well as it. I mean, I know it looks like it really has, but who did the cover? But so I've always, this is my way of saying that I've always been very interested in black culture, American culture especially, and the black characters have always been. Although I don't know why Jubilee is Jubilee, to my knowledge, is Japanese, but maybe that's somebody else. No, that's Jubilee. Oh, and also, I mean, Kamala Khan is not African American either. But you got Blade, you got Storm, and you got Miles Morales, Spider-Man. And that looks like America Chavez, who I believe is half black, half Puerto Rican. But it doesn't matter. As long as it's not a bunch of me's staring back at me all the time. Because there's plenty. I know it sounds very virtue signaling or very white liberal guilt, but really it's just the fact of the matter is that I have had my perspective for most of comic book history. If we go back to the golden age, which would be like the late 30s, mid 30s, the golden age of comic books has only been the white male perspective up until maybe in the 70s you started getting more women and characters of color, and it wasn't until really more recently that those sorts of representation, people were more mindful of that sort of thing. So I'm good. You can keep it going. I'd rather read somebody else's stuff. And then finally, this is not a weekly or monthly at all. This is Ice Cream Man Volume 1, subtitle Rainbow Sprinkles, I believe, which is a good. So this is written by W. Maxwell Prince, who is also writing Haha, which I talked about a couple weeks, or I think I talked about the first issue last week. That one is an anthology too. I thought it was going to be a continuing series, but each issue is a different story in Haha, and I believe Ice Cream Man is the same. I think, I don't know if there's different stories in issues. For anthology, if you're not aware, an anthology comic book is just one that is well, it can be a bunch of different stories by a bunch of different artists. It can be a bunch of different stories by one artist / creative team. And it can be a book where, like the Twilight Zone, where you have one self-contained story per issue. And I think Haha definitely does that. I think Ice Cream Man is a similar thing. And Haha, they all kind of center around clowning of some kind. And so Ice Cream Man is like a similar thing where I believe the conceit is that the Ice Cream Man comes to town and gives you a different story every time. And they're creepy and weird and horror stories. So after reading Haha, I was like, all right, I got to finally just read Ice Cream Man. The only reason I didn't even start getting this book when it started coming out was because it began to come out as I was shifting from working at a shop to shopping at a shop. So that's Pixar. And then I think maybe like Pixar last week. I got a lot of work to do today. I don't have time to fart around in here. Yeah, I'm talking to you. All right, so last week, let's see here. Yes, we'll begin thusly. I read X-Men Legends #1. And it was like I was saying last week, it's pretty much just picking up from where they left off in the 90s. It says in here, in the story, where exactly. This story takes place after X-Men #39, so that would have been 94 or so, around there. It was written by Nicieza and drawn by Brett Booth, who I'd forgotten about, was a big artist at the time. And this was fun. It was very stupid, goofy 90s X-Men stuff with the, I don't want to spoil it, but I guess it doesn't matter. So, like, the conceit of the story is that there's a new character, and we find out at the end of this issue that he is the Lost Summers brother. He's related to Cyclops and Havoc here. The only thing about that is they already did the Lost Summers brother back during Ed Brubaker, or no, Greg Rucka's run on Uncanny X-Men. Rucka or Brubaker's run on Uncanny X-Men introduced the character Vulcan, who was Gabriel Summers, is the youngest brother of Scott and Alex Summers. Thumbnail of the Summers family. So Scott Summers is Cyclops, Alex Summers is Havoc. When they were children, they were on a plane with their parents. Their parents were flying the plane, and they were attacked by the Shi'ar, an alien race that the X-Men would eventually become very embroiled with. And their parents pushed them out of the plane with one parachute, like strapped to them both, that Scott, take care of your brother, and they shove him out of the plane. And then that was the incident that triggered Cyclops' eye beams. So after that, they both had to go live in an orphanage. And then there's all the Mr. Sinister stuff that was retconned in. And it was assumed that their parents were dead. But then we found out years later that their father, Christopher Summers, is now a space pirate by the name of Corsair. Obviously, that's what happens. These deadbeat dads are. And then we find out during the I'm pretty sure it's Brubaker's, the Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire, I think. No. It was, I can't remember the story name now. Deadly Genesis. I pulled it out. And I'm pretty sure it's Rucka, now I'm saying it out loud. And this would have been like 06, 07 in there. So then we find out that, because it would have been, they found in the 80s, they met up with Corsair and the Starjammers. And they're still regularly occurring characters in the Marvel Universe. And Corsair was like, oh, right, well, your mom died. Sorry about that. And so we find out, though, in Deadly Genesis that she had been pregnant with Gabriel, who would become Vulcan. And he's also a mutant and powered. And he was a villain for a while. And then I think it was during the Rise in the Brubaker storyline. Greg Rucka wrote Deadly Genesis. Ed Brubaker wrote The Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire, and in that storyline is when Vulcan takes his revenge on the Shi'ar for having killed his mother. None of that is in here, because that all took place well after this original storyline from 94 had played itself out. But this is supposed to be insert in between there. So maybe they'll do some of that Seymour Skinner bullshit, and Amar Tanzarian thing, where they tell this story, then they go, all right, well, we all forgot. Like they did with the Century, too. Yeah, comic books are goofy. I love them. I also read last week the Immortal Hulk Flatline #1 by Declan Shalvey. This was super fun. This is very much when Bruce Jones was writing the Hulk back in the early aughts. he really endeavored to take the character back to the 1970s Bill Bixby version of the character. So he would roam from town to town, and he would do his best not to Hulk out, and he would always fail, and then it always, but he would solve a crime or something, and then he would have to blow town again because he was the Hulk. So this takes a page out of that book, and it's great because with the Immortal Hulk storyline now, which is entirely too involved for me to get into here, but the main Hulk title, the Immortal Hulk, has centered around it's a horror story. It's not like a kung fu type thing like that, very familiar version of the Hulk is. In this version, in the current series of the Hulk, it's one hellish thing after, like, in literally from hell, that the Hulk has to fight, or the more the supporting cast. This is more of a return to a pretty simple, like, you have Banner, you have the Hulk, and even though it's very in canon with the Immortal Hulk storyline, it still feels very much like, for a comic book comparison, it would be like the Bill Mantlo Hulk of the 80s, the Leave Hulk Alone Hulk. My personal favorite. So that's why this was fun. And in this issue, we meet one of Bruce Banner's old professors, who I looked up immediately, and is apparently a creation of Declan Shalvey's, which is fine. But I always kind of like when they pull a minor character from the past and give him a whole long backstory. But that's how well Declan Shalvey is not, like I've said last week, he's not as much a writer or even as much known for being an artist so much as he is for being a colorist. But this is really good. I'm really glad they let him do this. And then I also read last week, I read Hollow Heart #1. This was really good. I will say the artwork is not great. I'm pretty sure these are these guys' first thing. But the story is really fun. And it's not anything, again, I don't mean to damn with faint praise, but because it's a story about a cyborg being held against his will. And he's trying to, from being held against his will by this faceless monolith of a corporation. A kindly technician has taken pity on him and is trying to help. And we see parallels between his life and the robots. And this is really good. What I also didn't mention, I did mention last week that this was a tribute to the Marvel series ROM, this cover. I didn't realize it was actually ROM #1. That makes the most sense. But I also didn't realize is that the ROM #1 cover was originally done by Frank Miller. So this is further a Frank Miller tribute, which is interesting to me. And that's why I'm putting it on here, because that's what I do with this thing. So I'm looking forward to the rest of that series. And then I'm pretty sure I showed this when I bought it, but that would have been in 2020. This is Hardware, the Man in the Machine. This is Hardware #1 through 8. This was a series from 1993, and it was part of the Milestone. In 1993, Dwayne McDuffie, who had been a writer and editor for Marvel or for DC Comics for some years at that time, he worked for Marvel too. He created Damage Control, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm pretty sure it was his. It wasn't just him, but McDuffie kind of spearheaded this Milestone project. So Image was already becoming a thing. Vertigo was doing very well for DC. And so they thought, well, we could do another imprint that focuses on black characters and black writers and artists. Speaking of indigenous voices. And they were all new characters. They didn't want to use Black Lightning or any of that, because I believe also Milestone ended up like Vertigo was, these were property. Well, in Vertigo there was mostly properties already owned by DC, but the creative artists or the creative teams had a lot of artistic freedom, and they owned a lot of that shit, I believe, or they got more on the back end than most comics artists did. And Milestone, I believe, was the same. I think Dwayne McDuffie and all these guys owned these characters. Again, I could be wrong. Maybe they just had a better sort of royalties deal. But it definitely meant less creative restriction. There wasn't editorial up their asses the whole time. It didn't go great, though, to be honest. I loved the Milestone stuff. Because, again, in 93, I was what? 14? No. 93, I turned 15. Is that right? Nope, that's also not right. Yeah, 93, summer 93, I turned 16. So I think I was probably 15 when Milestone started. Yeah, because I was definitely reading. I definitely read a lot less superhero stuff after I turned 16 because I was too punk. But my point is, at 15, I still wanted to be black as I had when I was 13. And they were also just really good. Now, reading these stories, now there was like Static Shock, which became, I think, eventually a cartoon, and there were some other ones. But like I say, they didn't really do great. Hardware is really fun. It's basically just Deathlock, which was a Marvel character from the 70s, also black. But it's super over the top, ridiculous 90s stuff. It's like that book Crossover or like those all-time comics, Zero Says Deathscape, but it's not a parody. It's actually a book. So all the chains and yeah, a lot of the unnecessary cybernetics. Yeah, Dennis Cowan on art though, who was a genius back then, and it was very, especially for superhero books, he was definitely kind of a bit of an outlier. Like he didn't draw the house style, so to speak. So reading this book, it really it whipped past. It was a fun read. It's really dumb. Hardware is the name. What's his Metcalf? Curtis Metcalf, who's this brilliant scientist and who had grown up as an orphan, or at least without a father, and he was mentored by the head of this big corporation who paid for his education and encouraged his brilliance and his scientific genius and everything. And then it turns out he's a villain. What? It's very, it's very blaxploitation in that too. It's like the big white villain. I love that sort of thing. And so yeah, Hardware goes on just basic like Metcalf goes to the guy like, hey, I wanna do this or that. I want to do my own thing, and he's like, no, I own you, lock, stock, and barrel. So he creates this Hardware suit to become a vigilante, and with a woman he loves, no one understands him but his woman, and so he stops. He's a complicated man. I mean, he's made out of hardware. It's really dumb, to be honest with you. It's very vintage 1993, and I cannot get enough of it. All right. Speaking of can't get enough, that's the end of this. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. It's all right in the box. It's all right.